So we have Stéphane Bellon on the phone with ENRA, which is the French version of the USDA.
Thank you. So I'll try to rush it a bit because there are many slides and probably some of them will be skipped. So the topic of the presentation is about the dimensions of organic agriculture. Organics, plural, which are diversity, dynamics, and design, which I wanted to address. Next slide, please. So to introduce this presentation, I just wanted to remind about organic food and farming, which has come a long way. And as a sector, we now recognize that it has a strong identity due to certified production processes and products on the one hand, and at the same time, a connection and a base on what we call nature's economy, which is derived from Volster's work. Using the term organics, plural, not only refers to those multiple dimensions which are production, process, products linked with environment and health issues, but also with the diversity or plurality of the forms of organic that we'll see later. I will probably skip the three trends which are on that slide, because most probably you know them, and the same thing occurs with you in the United States. But I wanted to focus on the challenge, which is the following, referring to how can organics maintain its innovation capability as a condition for its own development. And to address this challenge, I wanted to refer to two logics or paradigms which both appear at this time in organics, which I call decomposition and integrity. To make it clearer, probably it will help, I wanted to refer to products that, such as potato chips in US or milk or yogurt in France, because they can be presented as a particular combination of distinctive elements, such as raw material or commodities, and flavor additives, fat content, resealable packaging for chips. And on the other end, we have products such as farm-made cheese, wine, honey, which exhibits a diversity as a function of contrasting and complete identities. So that's what I'm talking about, the difference between the two approaches, decomposability or decomposition, and identity or integrity. And those two, I consider them as two innovation pathways which can work together in tandem and which could account for the increasing fragmentation of food markets and also be part or depart from the mode of innovation, the classical mode of innovation which prevails based on economies of scale, formalism, and standardization. So I think with organic challenges, we in other innovation paradigms. So next slide, please. So the outline is simple. There's 3 points as announced in the title: diversity, dynamics, and design. So you can skip it because it must be clear for you at this stage. So the next slide is about the identity and diversity of organics. So there are two main points in that section. The one is about definitions of organics, and the next one is about classifications we can have of what organic reality is about. Hope you can see the nice drawings we have at the bottom with a reference to Aldo Leopold and a fall answering what is land. So you can go to next slide, please, defining organic. So in this slide, I just wanted to stress in relation with the topic of the workshop and the symposium that definitions of organics usually refer to organic agriculture as a production system or as an overall system of farm management and so on. And in Europe, we have a wonderful definition close to the one from IFOAM and the one from Codex Alimentarius. But in this definition, apart from saying, linking, I would say, production processes, farm management, food production, and environmental and climate action practices, biodiversity, which was mentioned before, animal welfare as well, and so on. On the right part of the slide, you can see what we call whereas, considering, etc. There are 81 of them in the European regulation. And interestingly, the first one acknowledged the fact that organic production plays a double societal role, providing for a specific market responding to consumer demands for organic products on the one hand, and on the other hand, delivering publicly available goods contributing to the protection of the environment and animal welfare, as well as rural development. So I think if we consider this as guiding potential development for organic, we're far from thinking about decomposition as it appears when you look at organic as a list of techniques, methods, or eligible inputs. And I think this general frame, with in between an important issue, which is the one of principles, which appear at European level, at Codex Alimentarius, in IFOAM for principles as well. I think principles can be considered as between a holistic framework, which would give identity to organics, and more detailed specifications with code of practices, which are shaped by accountability and which refer to decomposability. Anyhow, whatever the interpretation we have, this doesn't define a unique pathways or practices for organic. That's why we have to look a bit more into detail. So the next slide will be very brief because we don't have to go into national situations at this stage, just to say that we usually show growth in organics with percentage of growth and that sort of things. We see the increase in number of farmers, and sometimes without specifying what we're talking about, what kind of areas, what kind of land, and so on, and what kind of farmers possibly. And maybe not enough attention is paid as well to localities and territories, which is on the next slide. So you can skip to the next one on classifications. Typifying organic farming, and there is indeed a diversity of approaches to address organic diversity itself. Whether looking at practices, marketing strategies, farm size, motivations, attitudes, and so on. Looking also at different scales and maybe more local or territorial scales regarding environmental issues and the role of organic within those issues and differences among farmers. And together with inter or disciplinary viewpoints, namely on transition issues and their consequences. So we've been looking at those classifications on one particular example, which is the issue of conversion to organics. If you can have next slide with a diagram, thank you. I won't go into the content, but just this picture is mainly to differentiate not only comprehensive position versus normative, which you have at the bottom of the vertical axis, but also the time span we consider when talking about conversion or transition to organics. And in that case, we've seen a variety of approaches, and more or less involving combinations between agricultural and social sciences. In terms of conclusions, you can skip to the next slide, please. I'd like you to maybe consider the distance which has been taken between the original foundations of organic agriculture with ecology, and that's partly why IFOAM renewed this link with ecology. And that's maybe one point of discussion, but that's my perception. I also see as a challenge for the diversity of organic farming the fact that many other agricultures are kind of competing or are offering other ecological dimensions or environmental benefits. The third point is that the internal diversity should be recognized and acknowledged, especially when we address the issue of performances and in many debates regarding organic performances, its ability to feed the world, and so on. And the last point I wanted to mention is that most classifications don't consider the issues of intermediate positions among categories and transition issues. There is another concluding slide on this key point, but I think we can skip it. Just to remember, just the last point may be interesting, just to think about how diversity also enables us to think about dynamics, innovation, and design, and possibly adaptation to society concerns. So the next slide is the second part about dynamics and trajectories in organic. First, I wanted to indicate the general movement of trends that we currently have in organic own dynamics, I would say, and then think about transition pathways for organic. So, next slide, organics in the move, that's point 2.1. You know that probably many trends are characterize organic dynamics. We talk about institutionalization, specialization, commodification, and so forth, and conventionalization, which probably you have been more familiar with than we in Europe. In France, this conventionalization thesis is kind of tempered by the French convention theory, which enables thinking other pathways beyond bifurcation. We also, at this stage, we somehow wonder whether we don't also have a conventionalization of research, which is poorly debated in Europe at least. And we also suggest to address organics as prototype, which is the title of a book we edited last year. Prototype, which has several meanings, but could here be considered in the sense of immature model, not something which is evolving, which is in an ongoing process in dynamics itself. Next slide about transition pathways. Well, we see, what I wanted to stress is that conversion to organics can be a step towards transitions and not transition itself, involving different time spans, different relationships with not only the environment, with nature, with technology, with many dimensions. We know that there are a diversity of individual farm trajectories, from those who are close to organic, to those who go into more deeper disruptions, breakthrough. We increasingly have to see transition as supported by collective organizations, public commitments as well, and initiatives, and as far as Europe is concerned, the support by European agri-environmental schemes and also national plans as you have in US. And transitions can be also considered as more oriented by systemic properties like autonomy, diversification, resilience, and so forth, more than performance-based criteria, and think about design perspectives at a wider range of scales and dimensions beyond the farming system itself. The next slide is conclusions on the second section. So I would say dynamics relate both to organic design itself as giving an endpoint or direction to transitions and to frontier borders as well among categories within organic and with other agricultural systems. In transitions, as I said, there are multiple relationships, changing relationships with nature, technology, market, and so forth. We have to think about the role and the contribution of research and other agents, not only certifying bodies, but extensionists and many others, and farmers themselves in the orientation of organics. And as a whole, I think that conversion and transition to organics remain an exemplary and well-informed case to think about changes and transitions in agriculture and food systems generally. So the next section and slide is about the redesign issue itself. So I make a slight difference between redesign and design, because redesign implies more an analysis of where we start from. To address this redesign, I suggest to refer to the efficiency substitution redesign framework that probably you know, and think about how relevant it is for organics, and address the issue of performances and their evaluation criteria. So next slide is the framework. So to be brief on the central column, thinking about objectives and levels, we have the ESR framework. The first one is about improving the input efficiency. The second one is about input substitution, and the third one about system redesign. So it was proposed, this framework was proposed namely by Stuart Hill in '85 in the paper called Redesigning the Food System. So we already had a connection between plant protection, production, and food system. And Stuart Hill insisted on the institutional and collective dimension of redesign, which can be applied not only in production, but also in marketing, many other aspects, including human and social aspects. So the next slide is about the limitations. Well, of course, there is an interest of this framework for organic, but also limitations. Just wanted to insist on limitations, thinking of in the case of organic, I would say that substitution is a prerequisite, is a condition to move to organic, to shift to organic, and then we most probably have a framework which is not ESR but SER. The second point is about this framework is about its linearity, since it's often presented as steps. You have to start with efficiency, then go to substitution, and so on, which is probably not the case, because we can imagine at farm level combinations of efficiency and redesign, whether for different crops or activities or for the same production. The third point is that in France, at least, and possibly in Europe, because I think about a group called ECTOP, thinking about inputs, much attention has been given to efficiency as a source of innovation once we substitute inputs, but this focus is, to me, detrimental to the redesign issue, which is less tackled and addressed due to pressures and bottlenecks and regulations and so on. So we tend to give too much focus on efficiency of inputs in organics. So then the redesign issue is still pending with not only models to invent, but how to invent them as well. So that's about approaches to innovation. And finally, just to give some directions, which was mentioned in by the previous speaker partly, that's about which elements can we think about for diversification, for integration of other activities and trees, and for organification, if livestock production or animals are not included. Perhaps think organification beyond the farm level, based on community of practice of problems, or with specific avenues for taking into account the diversity of situations. So the next and almost final slide is about design and performances. So I think maybe the main message about that is about the history itself of this question of performances and the way we address it in organic. And I think we tend to focus more on individual performances and on trade-off and externalities instead of interdependencies or bunches of properties, of performances, sorry. And to go back to what I mentioned about regulations and the whereas, which is in the European regulations, I think that principles and whereas can serve for limiting organic scenarios involving multiple and different actors and to guide properties to achieve. So next slide is about conclusions about this section, the last one. So I just wanted to remind the key role of principles and umbrella organizations in these frameworks and linking organics framing and farming, which are interconnected. The specifications also play a role in making these frameworks go forward, and we also have to question those principles and enabling social and scientific critiques. So today, unity also lies in standards and certification. I just give the quotation of Gibbon, just to remind the end of its of what Gibbon said about sealing completely the frontier between organic and conventional farming, which could be extended to other agricultures. So my last slide is about conclusions. So we see the strong interconnections that exist among the three dimensions mentioned. For instance, diversity exhibits positions in different positions in trajectories, and those trajectories are oriented by design perspective. So in diversity, we can say we don't have, well, that's why I show this triangle. It's about connection between three dimensions. So in diversity, we see we don't have linear regimes of production practices and systems, and products and markets as well. In dynamics, we see that those dynamics are a combination of technical, ecological, and social issues, which develop in uncertainty and confrontation as well. And in design, we indeed can oppose a reductionist versus holistic vision, and which could serve to build scenarios. So the prism you can see on the center of the picture just tries to represent our two paradigms of unicity on the one hand and the other one, decomposability on the other end, can be seen as two sides of the same triangle or prism. And indeed, not to be dichotomic, I think hybridation of logics can also be an asset for the development of organic or organics in general. So thank you very much. You have a next slide to thank you formally. And that's all for the time being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stéphane. Are there any questions? Can I pass the mic a couple places? Do you mind if I do? Okay.
Merci, Stéphane. I wanted to ask your opinion on this. In the U.S., as in France, there is a great concern that we are somewhat stagnating in conversion to organic. But if you talk to the organic farmers, it really is not that big a concern for many of the organic farmers. And I think it has a lot to do with they know their place and they want to continue their life the way they're living and then not be worried about more people coming in, more competition, etc. And I was just wondering if the sentiment is the same with French organic farmers.
It depends on who we talk about as for organic farmers. The National Trade Union for Organic Farmers in France is called National Federation for Organic Agriculture, which represents something like 70% of the organic farmers, and all organic farmers should be around 25,000 now in France. And 3 years ago, they tried to anticipate what would be a significant increase in the number of organic farmers. And for that, they kind of identified a specific label which they call organic coherence or consistency, if I may say, just to ensure, to think about what conditions and what label and what standard system and certification could be derived if we arrive to this upscaling. So that's on the farming side, at least for this Organic Federation, they do it, try to anticipate what it would be. At the same time, we have, as I said, public policies supporting the organization of value chains. We have environmental schemes. We have public procurement, which is also at his level supporting the demand. And we still have a gap in terms of production, including cereals, which is really a pity in France. So well, my colleagues could complete, but to me, we still have room. There is a concern about the future growth, and there is another concern which I briefly mentioned about if there are newcomers in organic, what kind of equilibrium, what kind of what proportion, I would say, of different categories which are knowledge could make it work together. So, did I answer your question?
Yes. I mean, she's nodding yes. I'm not Kathleen Dellett. I'm Brian Baker, and the mic has been passed over to me. Merci, Stéphane. My question has to do with the uses of the words transition and conversion. And I thank you for making your presentation in English. But I find even among native English speakers there's a continental divide about how those terms are used. That in Europe, the way that the concepts are used to look at farms that go from conventional to organic production, what constitutes conversion, what constitutes transition. And with transition, it looks like the focus is on the physical, chemical, and biological and natural systems and the properties and processes that take place, while conversion is more a social, economic, and cultural phenomenon involving the human element. And then you take it to people from the global south who are outside of this discussion between the U.S. and the EU, and farmers who have been farming sustainably for generations get very confused when we talk about transition or conversion, when actually what they're doing meets the spirit but not the letter of the law and the regulations in the target markets. So what my question is to you, how do we integrate these natural, ecological, and human elements and come up with a unifying theory about transition and conversion?
Well, difficult question. I would say we probably have to be pragmatic and think about it step by step, which is offered by transition processes. There is no definite starting point and order or steps. You understood I'm not really stepwise in the process. Basically, I think there is a human, individual, or family, or at farm level, there is a will to do something, to change framework, but I don't know exactly what the framework is composed of. That's why I refer to that, framing and farming, an organic framing and farming, because it includes many things. And even in the IFOAM, the 4 IFOAM principles, I add another one, which is the principle of reality, because we also have to consider what's the starting point, where we start from, what is the level of awareness, knowledge, competencies and practices that people have before they think about changing and transitioning. So I think that transition can be even at the level of one generation. I met a couple of organic farmers who told me, well, it took me a whole life, you know, a couple of, well, maybe not a whole life, but 20 years to organize a farm as I saw it as organic. And then the issue is about the next generation. And, well, we in that phase, for those who already shift to organic farming one generation ago, I would say. But if you acknowledge that all those dimensions are important, natural, human, and relation to techniques, I think that the important is to consider all of that, and not only at farm level, but as I said, also in networks at more collective levels, because I would see it's more and more collective, I mean, as groups and so on, that transition is not only an individual matter. Did I answer your question, Brian, after last time we met in Istanbul?
He's shaking his head. Work? Okay, there we go. Yes, he's shaking his head. Yes, that answers it.